Look, I love this country. I do. I stand up when the flag goes by. I put my hand over the heart when they play the national anthem. And people criticize me for that. I don't think this country's perfect. And I love it enough to admit that we have things we need to work on. That just goes on a to-do list. But I love this country. And we need to all stand up for this country and stop apologizing for this country.
Ain't nothing changed, nothing new here to see. This ain't nothing but some political maneuvering. America, welcome to the eulogy, eat it up. It's called political buffoonery.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome to This Week in DUMBmocracy, where we showcase some of the dumbest newsmakers of the week. There's a new combatant entering the battlefield that is the American culture wars. It's none other than Dr. Phil, your own favorite doctor. Your mom and your grandma probably love him to death. But what side is he on exactly? Is he coming in for the right, for the left? Turns out that he's on neither side. He just wants people to come together and stand up for our country. And we got a taste of that as he's making the rounds talking about his new book on both leftist media and conservative media. We're going to talk all about Dr. Phil and what he's doing here, but before we do, please subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell so you don't miss any other shows, and if you like what you're seeing here in this or any other video on the channel, be sure to smash that thumbs up button, like, comment, share the show with your friends, all that good stuff, because all that stuff, it all helps with the YouTube algorithm. Thanks to your efforts, we're almost at 1,700 subscribers, and we've only been back for less than a year, so thanks for getting the word out about everything. And to all you newbies out there, maybe this is your first time watching, maybe you've seen a couple of videos. I hope that this video earns your subscription as we talk about Dr. Phil's emergence into the political arena. Now, of course, Dr. Phil, like every other celebrity personality out there, he's out there making the rounds, trying to sell his latest book, also talking about his new television network coming out in April. I never thought I'd see the day that Dr. Phil owns an entire network. On this network, he's going to be tackling political issues. He's got this special about the border coming out. It's all very interesting. So, of course, he's making the rounds right now, going to media personalities on the left and on the right. After all, Dr. Phil is a very likable guy, hasn't really offended that many people, so he gets the luxury of going to just about everyone on the political spectrum because they want to hear what he has to say. But the ladies on The View seem to get a bit of a shock in talking to Dr. Phil about both the issues on the southern border and the issues concerning the pandemic and the ramifications and consequences of the choices made during the pandemic with children especially. He also went on Jesse Waters' show, Talk About a Day. He went from The View to Jesse Waters to talk more generally about his own sort of unifying philosophy when it comes to the political discourse of the day. I'm a big fan of what he has to say. He says a lot of the things that I've been saying for the past year or so, what I say in my book. It's great to have him taking up the standard for common sense. What am I talking about? I'm going to show you right now.
Just to jump in here, when your network starts, you're hosting the primetime show called Dr. Phil Primetime. And for an upcoming episode, my understanding is that you went to the southern border. Now, you're saying that you're going to give people facts. What did you take away from that experience, and what kind of reporting are you going to be bringing back from that experience?
I'll tell you a fact I took away. I talked to the head of all the border guards down there, the head of the union. I asked him straight up, kids are coming over the border with numbers written on them, phone numbers and addresses. Do we check those out? He said, well, we call them. Is it possible that we're sending them into known prostitution rings or sweatshops? He said, it's not possible. It is absolute. We are using American tax dollars to ship children into known prostitution and sweatshops.
Some children?
Well, who knows?
Okay.
You really want to do this now?
Now, you see what Sunny Hostin tried to do there. She tried to make it seem like this is more of the exception rather than the rule concerning the fate of children crossing the southern border in the manner that Dr. Phil was talking about here. Dr. Phil breaks things down in terms of consequence to children a lot, because I think that's a unifying thing to talk about. Nobody wants to see children put in harm's way, no matter what your political persuasion is. So when Sonny Hostin tries to marginalize the problem that Dr. Phil was talking about, he pushes back on that point based upon the facts as he understands them from his own personal observations and his own personal knowledge. You kind of can't dispute a person's experience. I mean, isn't that what the left says? That everybody has their own lived experience and that's their truth and they own their truth? Sonny Hostin was trying to take away Dr. Phil's truth there by marginalizing what he wanted to talk about, but he was having none of it. So far, he's off to a great start.
We don't know. I said, are you...
So what kind of checking do they do? So
They
'cause
call
you
the
said-
number and
and-
say, do you know about this child? They say, yes. Will you receive them when they come? Yes. I said, is it possible that that's a prostitution ring? He said, we know enough to know that in a number of cases, it has turned out to be absolute sex ring. It has turned out to be an absolute sweatshop. I said, how is this possible?
Well, what do they
And he
do
said,
then?
it is happening.
What do they do then if they know that that's happening? Where is the U.S. Attorney's Office? Where is the...
Here's the
Damn good
thing.
question,
You
isn't
have
it?
Cut to commercial.
Notice that little cut there with Whoopi Goldberg trying to get a word in edgewise? That was a cut to commercial. It was a good question to ask. What is the government doing? Spoiler alert, as we know from the issues at the southern border, not too much. But let's come back from commercial and let's see what Dr. Phil had to say.
And I don't mean to derail us, but you mentioned that there are children crossing the border with numbers and names. Many of them those names belong to their family members, but you're saying, and that's true, but some of them are sex trafficked, some of them are sweatshop trafficked.
Again, she's resetting the framing of what Dr. Phil said. Most of them go to the families, but some of them are involved in criminal activity or victimized by criminals. So again, she's trying to reframe Dr. Phil's experience and discussions with this Border Patrol officer. Dr. Phil's no fool. He knows what's going on here, and he's able to bring awareness to what his experience, his personal knowledge was.
Why do you think the federal government is not involved? Why isn't the U.S. Attorney's Office involved? Is it a resource issue?
It's a resource issue.
And have they reached out to the Biden administration about that?
Well, you know, it's hard to know. They say that they're so overwhelmed with processing that that's all they can do. They've become social workers and processors and not investigators and border guards because they're just processing.
Some pretty inconvenient truths for the ladies at The View to realize here, because they're Biden cheerleaders. We've seen this time and time again. They're definitely anti-Trump, definitely pro-Biden. So when a seemingly neutral personality like Dr. Phil comes on, who has shown his bona fides for caring for children, discussing this plight at the southern border, they have no choice but to listen, and they don't have any knowledge, facts, or figures to dispute or refute what he's saying. Keeping with this theme of Dr. Phil bringing up inconvenient truths to the ladies of The View, is this discussion concerning the ramifications of decisions made during the pandemic on children's social development. Now, I gotta give one of my patented legal disclaimers here just to cover my ass. I am no expert on the pandemic. I am no expert on the decisions made. I'm not an educational expert. I'm not a social scientist. I don't have the facts and figures at my fingertips the way Dr. Phil does. And because he is an expert, I am going to take him on his word with a lot of the things that he's saying. I want you guys to be able to fact check it if you want to, so certainly feel free to do so. But I'm going to rely on his expertise to take us through this discussion and just give him the benefit of the doubt here.
Everybody got that?
Think about it. In like 08, 09, smartphones came on and kids stopped living their lives and started watching people live their lives. And so we saw the biggest spike and the highest levels of depression, anxiety, loneliness, and suicidality since records have ever been kept. And it's just continued on and on and on. And then COVID hits 10 years later, and the same agencies that knew that are the agencies that shut down the schools for 2 years. Who does that?
How dare you question me? That's harassment.
Who takes away the support system for these children? Who takes them away and shuts it down? And by the way, when they shut it down, they stopped the mandated reporters from being able to see children that were being abused and sexually molested, and in fact sent them home and abandoned them to their abusers with no way to watch, and referrals dropped 50 to 60%.
Well, you know, when you put it that way,
But this is one of the sacred cows of the left, right? Talking about the pandemic and the decisions made there. Here comes the pushback from The View.
There's also a pandemic
Yeah,
going
there
on, and
was.
they were trying to save
They were
children's
trying to
lives,
save
so as
kids'
well.
lives. Remember, we know a lot of folks who died during this, so it wasn't. People weren't laying
Not
around
school
eating
children.
bond. But well, you know what? We're lucky. Maybe we're lucky they didn't, because we kept them out of the
Spit it out.
the places that they could be safe.
So I put it to you guys. Let's make this the question of the day here. Whose word are you going to believe here? You're going to believe Dr. Phil, who has studied this issue, who is a licensed professional, or at least he was. I don't know what his license status is right now, but he certainly has decades of experience in studying this, or Whoopi Goldberg? Let me know who you believe is making sense to you, at least, talking about the decisions in the pandemic. Whoopi supporting what happened during the pandemic, Dr. Phil explaining why it was the wrong course of action. Who do you believe? Let me know in the comments. I kind of have a feeling, though, I think I know how you guys are thinking. We've been talking enough together for me to know what you guys are thinking a little bit here. That said, let's go on.
Because no one wanted to believe we had an issue.
Are you saying no school children died of COVID?
I'm saying it was the safest group. They were the less vulnerable group, and they suffered and will suffer more from the mismanagement of COVID than they will from the exposure to COVID. And that's not an opinion, that's a fact.
Well,
And the crowd turns on The View, Anna Navarro, with that total setup question. And Dr. Phil KO'd her with his response. It's not opinion, it's fact.
Take your seat.
So this was just stop number 1 today for Dr. Phil. You may have seen online these clips going around talking about Dr. Phil smacking down The View and all that, especially from those on the right who like to see this stuff happen. But he then went on to Fox News to talk with Jesse Waters, and he got a little more philosophical about his point of view about America in general and the politics of the day. Now, we're going to talk about that during the break. I really hope you come back for that after the break, because it's really important for everybody to hear what Dr. Phil has to say. Like what you see so far? Go ahead and smash that thumbs up button. Also, leave us a comment and tell us what you're thinking. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another show. I'm really glad you guys stuck around for the second half of this video. It's really important to hear. Dr. Phil went on to Fox News and Jesse Waters' primetime show to discuss political culture, American culture, cancel culture that we've been plagued with, the culture wars that are going on in America. What Dr. Phil talked about as the tyranny of the fringes. What does he mean by that? Well, it means that people aren't speaking up as much because the fringes are imposing their will on everyday Americans. And, you know what? I'm just going to let Dr. Phil explain this in his own words.
So we're suckers, and we don't want to speak up about it because we're afraid of being labeled haters?
Exactly. And, you know, there's a study that I talk about in We've Got Issues where we compared people's willingness to speak up in 1950 versus willingness to speak up now in 2023. And it has, people that are unwilling to express their views have tripled since 1950. People don't want to talk now, because if you do, then with the advent of social media platforms and the different ways that you can be targeted and labeled, they go to your work, they threaten to boycott the business that you work at if they don't get rid of you, fire you, the ways you can be portrayed on social media platforms. People are just saying, look, it's easier not to speak out. And that has to stop. There has to be a call to action. This middle group of people throughout America that care about this country, love this country, need to say enough is enough and too much is too much. And I've got to stand up and speak up. And look, I love this country. I do. I stand up when the flag goes by. I put my hand over the heart when they play the national anthem. And people criticize me for that. I don't think this country's perfect. And I love it enough to admit that we have things we need to work on. That just goes on a to-do list. But I love this country, and we need to all stand up for this country and stop apologizing for this country, stop apologizing for having rules and guidelines.
Yes, Dr. Phil is hitting on everything I love to hear. People need to stand up for the country. I say you have to do that by becoming more of a discerning voter, by becoming more educated with our candidates and looking out for political buffoons. Dr. Phil is just talking about basically just standing up and being counted, speaking out and speaking up in favor of the rule of law, in favor of our American political culture, in favor of our culture in general. I love hearing stuff like that. Let's keep going here.
Why do you think some of those women on The View, who we love dearly, they wanted to talk about the narrative of the COVID pandemic?
Okay, so this goes back to the clip that we were talking about earlier that you saw before the break. Dr. Phil has a little more to say about his observations of going on that television appearance on The View.
Yeah, here's the thing. You can't just make up facts, and that's what's happening right now. I think we've got, well, I call them the tyranny of the fringe. We've got these fringe factions that are trying to rewrite history, rewrite science, rewrite biology, just pretend that facts aren't facts because they don't want them to be. But you know what? They are. And we've got facts that have been there for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, and you can't just change them because you don't want them to be the truth.
Excellent point. But I think what Dr. Phil might be missing here is that some of these people that are looking to change facts and deal with narratives instead are those that we relied upon to provide us with factual information. Of course, I'm thinking about people like Dr. Fauci, who cared more about preserving a narrative than he did about actually dealing with the facts of the pandemic. That's just my opinion, YouTube. I'm not saying anything negative about the way people acted during the pandemic or anything like that. I do think that people have a breach of trust. They feel a breach of trust from people who should have been providing facts. And that has led to this development, this overdevelopment in our culture of dismissing expertise in facts. Sometimes it's warranted. I do believe sometimes it's warranted when those who are pretending to be experts are simply passing off their own narrative, which has to be stopped, by the way. I think experts should be held to a higher degree of accountability. But Dr. Phil is right in what he's saying here as well. We have to go back to a recognition of facts being facts, even when those who are the guardians of the facts, the so-called experts, are breaching that trust.
How do you defeat or confront the fringe without letting them take over the rest of Western society?
Well, here's the thing. They identify an enemy, and then they focus on that enemy. Most of the people in America don't have or want to have an enemy, so they're not as focused and they're not as organized. We need to decide that we want to start solving problems instead of winning arguments. And that's one of the principles I talk about in the book. And it's real easy to tell whether you're talking to somebody that wants to win an argument, you got right fighters just wanting to yak, or you've got people that are saying, look, let's come together and come up with a solution that will begin to make changes for the better. And we need people that will focus on solving problems instead of winning arguments. And if we will do that, the first thing you've got to do with these people on the other side of the issue, you've got left and right, is focus on what can we agree on. Because you know what? Everybody agrees we want a stronger America. Everybody agrees we want our kids to have a better world than we had when we came along and grew up through it. Everybody agrees that we want a good economy. Everybody agrees that we want more safety. Everybody agrees on so many core things. Let's focus on what we agree with first, and then see if we can start talking about our differences.
Bills, can I get an amen? Amen, brother.
My goodness, Dr. Phil is dead on here. Let's stop demonizing adversaries to our position. I completely agree with that. There's no reason to make boogeymen or make paper tigers out of political opponents. Everybody's in it for the same reasons. It's just different paths on how to get there. Stop demonizing people on the left. Stop demonizing people on the right. Everyone's got to be acting in concert together at some point to get to a common goal. Let's start focusing on what makes us the same rather than what divides us. There are too many people out there profiting off of the pain of division. I'm looking right at people like Ibram X. Kendi. I'm looking at people like Matt Gaetz. There are people on both sides of the aisle who think this is a zero-sum game, that in order for somebody to win, somebody else has to lose. That's not how it works. I know this from being an attorney. The best negotiation outcomes are ones where both sides leave relatively unhappy that they didn't get everything, but they got just enough to be happy with where they are. That's the way governance happens. That's the way solutions happen. We need to get back to that. We need to get back to those unifying principles of Americans, just being Americans, not being African Americans or Italian Americans or people of color or identifying by gender or sexuality. Let's get past all that bullshit. Let's get back to being Americans, being unified together, realizing that we're in it together, and knowing that we can only get to where we need to get to in the future by working together. I am so glad that Dr. Phil has entered this culture war. And frankly, if this is what he's going to be talking about, I'll follow this man anywhere. But listen, that's just my opinion right now. I want to know what you guys think about all this. I want to know what you think about Dr. Phil entering the culture war arena. I want to know about your reactions to what happened on The View and his overall philosophy that he talked about on Fox News. Let's get in the comments together. And as always, like and share the show with your friends. Subscribe to the channel. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the shows. I'm really looking forward to hearing what you guys think about all this. Let's talk about Dr. Phil. Let's get in the comments and discuss this video and any other shenanigans and buffoonery happening every day this week in DUMBmocracy.
All views and opinions expressed here are not necessarily of the mainstream media and may offend some listeners. It's called political buffoonery.